the recent situation in Syria. For more on this, we have Mr. Li Guofu, who is a senior research fellow and director of the Center for Middle East Studies at China Institute of International Studies. Sir, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, in the U.S., we have Ambassador Theodore Katouf. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Syria. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. In Tehran, we have Professor Mohammad Marandi from University of Tehran. Welcome to you as well, Professor. Gentlemen, we are at a very important and crucial crossroad. Can anyone tell us, does the international community have any specific sensible plan about how to deal with the devastating situations that the Syrian people are now involved in every day? Ambassador Katouf.
Unfortunately, no. There is nobody that you can point to who has both the means and the will to help bring peace to Syria. The Syrian conflict is now internationalized. We know that it's part of an ongoing struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Also, great powers. Russia and the United States are not seeing eye to eye, largely because of the Ukraine and other issues. And therefore, the Syrian conflict is destined to go on in one form or another for the foreseeable future.
Mr. Ambassador, may I just play a quote? In an interview with CBS News, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said recently, Washington will have to negotiate with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad for a political transition in Syria. Let's take a look at this.
Yet the Assad regime to negotiate, we're going to have to make it clear to him that there is a determination by everybody to seek that political outcome and change his calculation about negotiating. That's underway right now.
All right, that's what Mr. Kerry said. And then later you have the U.S. State Department spokeswoman Mary Harf said later that Kerry was, quote, not specifically referring to Assad. She reiterated that Washington would never negotiate directly with Syrian leaders. Of course, a very conflicting information coming out of Washington. But Mr. Ambassador, I want you to help us to understand what is the temperature now in Washington in terms of talking or even negotiating with the Assad government?
Washington, I believe, is still not ready to deal directly or negotiate with Bashar al-Assad and his regime. However, what Kerry is signaling is that you cannot have any solution to this problem without bringing Assad and his regime into it. And while Kerry was presumably implying that we have to convince Assad at some point to step aside and allow for free and fair elections in Syria. There's no reason that Assad at this point would be interested in such a undertaking, since he knows there is no real democratic alternative to him.
All right.
His opponents are both radical groups.
I see. Professor Marandi, what do you think about this, at least words coming out of Washington? Do you think this is a change of heart, or a change of strategy, or a change as a result of the proportion of powers reality on the ground inside Syria? Professor Marandi.
I think that the United States really is being forced to change its policy towards the region because its influence is declining gradually. And the United States has miscalculated very heavily when it comes to Syria. The United States initially allowed the Turks, Qatar, Saudi Arabia to fund extremist organizations in the name of legitimate opposition groups, but we all knew from very early on that these organizations were extremists. In fact, a large number of them initially cooperated with NATO and Arab oil-rich regimes in Libya, people like Abdul Hakim Belhaj, who went from Libya to Turkey to coordinate efforts in Syria. So things went very bad for the United States, and it not only destroyed Syria, but the spread of these radicals, these extremists across the board. We now see them in Nigeria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, even in China, Australia, and France. It's really beyond the control of the United States. So I think the Americans have recognized that this policy is a repetition of what they did in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda, but only much worse, much greater.
I see. Ambassador Katouf, it's only fair that I let you to respond to that. Professor Morandi is namely saying it is the United States that's making a mess inside Syria, and now everybody has to take care of this mess that you have made. Quote.
Well, obviously, I don't agree. I believe that the Syrian people rose up of their own accord. The Assad regime wanted the opposition to become more radicalized, and they used violence against peaceful demonstrators in the streets, which helped turn the opposition towards the use of violence. And once the opposition became violent, it was almost inevitable that radical Islamist groups would begin to play an important role. I don't believe that the United States or any great power can dictate what's going on in that region of the world. I think we have to recognize that region has a dynamic of its own.
All right. Mr. Lee, you've been attentively listening.